Welcome to Impact Farming, where we introduce you to the people and ideas that will have a massive impact on your farming operation. Brought to you by Farm Marketer. Sit down, start the engine, and let's roll with today's show.
Even farmers in an ad for weed control would rather not be spraying weeds. That's what we're here for. Bayer cereal herbicides work to control weeds in your wheat, barley, and oats, so you can do what you do best. Get back to farming. Get back to what you love.
Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Impact Farming Show. Today we have the always amazing Terry Betker joining us. How are you, Terry?
Hi, I'm great, Tracy. How are you?
Good. I am excited to have you on the show today as part of our transition planning series. And I'm really excited to talk to you about something that I know you have a lot of experience in and something that's weighing on your mind a little bit. And we'll dive into the topic and talk about it right away, but it's something that you've learned and a step that's often missed. And if people miss this step, this part of transition planning, it can make the whole process difficult. So I'm leaving everybody on the edge of their seat right now. Yeah. And before we dive in, I want to just get you to share a little bit more about who you are, what you do, and speak about Backswath management and the work you do with farmers as well.
Thanks. I'd love to. Tracy, I have to say that I love doing these sessions as well. And I even dressed up today. Well, I half dressed up. Oh,
look at
I'll
you.
leave that everybody's imagination to where the suit jacket ends.
Oh, dear. We just took that episode way left field.
Yeah. So we'll set those visual images aside. So
we're leaving them on two cliffhangers.
Yeah. Well, I could put some of what we're looking at outside into perspective here, meaning the snow everywhere when we're not supposed to see that image this time of year either.
Yeah.
Yeah. But thanks for the opportunity. And
you're welcome.
Tracy, at Backswath, we're farm management consultants. And we work with farmers across Canada, but primarily in Western Canada, and we help them with different aspects of planning around strategy, typical business planning, a lot of focus on finance because capital and debt and more profit margins in agriculture, farming seem to be top of mind all the time. So a lot of what we do is in that area of financial management, but over and above that. Well, we do record keeping. Can't forget that. So we have a fully integrated financial management service line, right through to contract CFO application, depending on what it is the farm family is looking for help with. Tracy, I'd say about half of what we do involves some aspect of transition, whether it's an active transition plan that's getting kind of organized or whether we're talking about a transition plan that may have already been put together previously, and now we're helping the family work through the implementation. So there's a lot of focus on that aspect of business management, i.e. transition.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for sharing. I know there has been a lot of discussion about transition planning in the industry long before I even started this show. You have been working with farmers for many, many years, and I feel, being a farmer, talking to farmer, that transition planning can seem like such a big topic. And I think sometimes farmers get overwhelmed and lost in the weeds of the conversation. So I want to start this chat with you about setting the stage, talking a little bit about transition planning, and just really simplifying it. Because of course, as an individual, I know if something seems overly complicated, our brains just seem to have this mechanism where we shut down and we don't want to deal with it. If it seems like like all these crazy things and so many steps, well, guess what? There's animals that need tending, crops that need tending, and anything other than dealing with transition planning will probably happen. And I'm sure you've seen that many more times than me. So I want to get you to maybe reflect on your time over the last 20 years. What has stayed the same in transition planning and what hasn't changed and why? Can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'd love to. Tracy, I spend a lot of time thinking about transition because we talk to a lot of farm families about it. But I personally find it really quite interesting to try to understand what it is that we're talking about, what it is that makes it seem for some farm families to be daunting or difficult. And one of the ways that I think we can all benefit from trying to better understand a current situation that we find ourselves in is to look back. Okay. And if we were to, look back, say 20 years ago and see what farms were and how they were organized and compare that to where they're at today, then stop and think about that and try to extrapolate that forward. What are we going to be dealing with 20 years or generationally in the next generation? And when I think about it in those terms, then I also try to understand, well, okay, what's changed and what hasn't changed. And as I don't have any crystal ball. I just have a lot of observation on what is and what has gone on. Interestingly, Tracy, the first succession planning conference that was called at that time, succession planning conference that I attended was in 1999. That's over 30 years ago.
Wow.
And we talked about aspects of succession planning at that time, the average age of farmer being like 57 and all these farms to transition. And then there was another conference 10 years later, and then there was another conference about 10 years after that. And here we are in 2021 talking about transition planning, and it's some of the same headlines get discussed. Not enough farms have transition plans or succession plans, and yet we're easily a generation down the road. And so what has changed and what hasn't? And to me, there's two aspects of what we're talking about, and we'll probably drill down into that in a little bit here. But we basically talk about in transition two things: ownership and management. And what I kind of come to understand is ownership correlates closely with people. It's what we want, what's important to us. There are other aspects of ownership that become really top of mind for a lot of farmers, such as tax. But let's set some of that structural discussion aside and come back and just think about it from the ownership as it relates to people. People haven't changed. We are what we are. People are what we are. I mean, we obviously change as we mature, through our life, but we are still individuals and people, and that hasn't changed a ton. What has changed is the size of farms, the complexity of farms, complexity brought on by different things. So complexity brought on obviously by the size of some farms. Typically, farms have tended to get bigger, and some farms have become more complex around what it is that they do and how they do it, notwithstanding the size, meaning that they might have more than one business activity going on in the farm. And the other thing that's changed from that's changed alongside of that is there's more people involved, and this adds complexity. And so if we step back, and I might even suggest we just pause here for a minute, let people that may be listening just think back about what their farm did look like 20 years ago and what it looks like today.
Different world.
Yeah, and then try to understand, well, what are we headed towards? And so I think the things that have changed are around the management. And then as I spend my time trying to understand it, and part of that understanding is trying to figure out, well, how are farms that are getting managed today going to be managed 20, 25 years from now, generationally, one step ahead. So that's some of what I think has changed and hasn't changed. And when I have an opportunity to talk about this in public, say as a speaker someplace, or in a workshop, I'll throw out a bit of a rhetorical question, and it'll be along the lines of what do people think has changed? And if the rate of change, if they think that the rate of change in agriculture is going to slow down, or perhaps move in a different direction, retract is a good word, to where this all becomes simpler in a sense, well, then perhaps what I'm going to suggest is it becomes less relevant. But I can tell you that I do not recall ever doing this over the last 20 years of speaking or getting involved with groups of farmers in a workshop where someone has said to me, they think the rate of pace is going to slow. Everybody anticipates that we're just going to process things faster, deal with issues. The rate of change is going to increase, not slow. And so, some things that overlay that typically I don't know for a lot of farm families get the press, as in the average age of the farmer is 57 years old. But I think for a lot of farms, those considerations are actually more important than the age discussion.
Okay. Well, and I think too, when we were chit-chatting a little bit about this subject, when we hear about transition planning, we often go to the technical details, and we'll dive in, and you're going to share the two parts, and we'll go through that a little bit later. But when you hear about transition planning, I think that's really why people get stumped up, as they go, will and tax planning and shareholders agreement, all the technical details.
Sure. Yeah.
And I know I love this conversation that we're having right now, because it's a little bit more start with the end in mind, cart before the horse, and a different take where right now you're saying, you know what, let's just put that aside and dive into something that you feel is a growing concern, something that you've shared, and something exactly like you just said doesn't get enough press. And if you don't start with the correct end in mind, how does that work? So on that long-winded introduction, you know me, Terry, sometimes I get going, but can you expand on that? I know you are concerned and feel that farmers need to be talking more about this than the technical details right now. Take it away.
And the risk in doing this is that none of us know what things are going to look like 20 years from now, obviously, right? So we're talking about something that's quite abstract. Maybe a way for me to frame what it is that I have concerns about is that a lot of the farm families that I end up talking to one-on-one, either in an engagement, so in the environment, Tracy, where it's not a public forum, i.e. a presentation or a workshop, but it's a one-on-one discussion with a farm family. A lot of those discussions tend to be centered around the family trying to understand what transition looks to them right now. So, and this isn't wrong. So that there should be. I hope nobody reads into this that, oh my goodness, we've made some errors in judgment, and in no way do I want to make that insinuation. Farm families are, by and large, anywhere in Canada, quite successful in what they've been able to accomplish in the last number of years, ending up in where they are today.
Yes.
Logically, every one of us in our businesses, where we're at in our businesses, is a result is a function of what decisions have been made in the past.
Mm-hmm.
So if we wanted to be in a different place right now, then we probably should go back and examine some of the decisions that were made 5 and 10 years ago. Logically, if we want to be in a different place in the future, then we need to examine what the decisions are that we're making today. Now, from a transition planning perspective, farm families are where they are, and they're typically in discussions about this aspect of planning in their business, dealing with what's at hand, what who the next generation is, like who are the next generation of farmers, and back to what we talked about, how are we going to transition ownership to that next generation, and how are we going to transition management? Okay, so has to happen. Mm-hmm. The but here, though, and what the message that I'm trying to or wanting to try to convey here is that while people are dealing with that now, we can't wait till let's say that the situation that we're talking about is as a farm family where the parents are 65 years old. The next generation is 35 to 40, and there's children in the household. And they are now in the process of talking about transition, or think they should be having discussions about transition. In other words, starting now, or having started just in the last 2 or 3 years, say, for example. The point I'm trying to make is I don't think farm families can afford to wait until the 40-year-old generation now is 60 or 65 and start having this discussion again at that time. Because the farms are going to be simply that much more complex. So what I don't think gets talked about enough is that application of transition planning. Certainly, we need to understand the transition of the current situation, whether it's this year or within the next 5 years or whatever that more immediate time frame or timeline looks like. But once that's done, farm families, I don't believe, can afford, it's a pretty strong word, I don't think it would be good business to say, good, that's done, and now I don't have to worry about that for another 20 years.
Okay.
I think the discussion, and this is happening. I talked to some farm families who are actively employing this aspect of management in their businesses, where they may be 40 or 45 and nicely through the transition. And the decisions that they're contemplating making now they do factor in to the decisions that they're making now, what the implications might be to future transition. And I believe that to be different, and I think somewhat critically important in farm families when they're thinking about transition, and that being much different than what it was 20 years ago and what it is today. Did I hope I explained that clearly enough.
Yeah, I think, well, I could probably pick 5 different things out of there, but the one thing that I'll quickly pick out and comment on is the thought of the end in mind, and also that this is an ongoing conversation and it's not an occasion. It's not now for the 35 to 40-year-old. It's maybe and I might be going a little bit somewhere different with this, Terry, but also I think what I'm hearing is a mindset of transition, a filter of transition. And if you think of it, if we had children, Anthony and I, every decision that we're making right now is going to affect the transition for our kids if they want to farm. And I mean, you got to be proactive on today and in today, because who knows if somebody's going to come up and take over the farm. But if you're making massive decisions without that transition lens and consideration, like building a whole new 500 head part to a dairy, that's my decision in my 30, 40-year-old stage here. Well, heck, I just decided on what the transition's going to look like for my kids and the debt that they're taking on, right? Is that sort of where you're going?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. You bring up a really interesting aspect there. To me, there is a close connection between transition planning and long-term strategy.
Yeah.
What do we need that farm to look like, and how do we need that farm to be organized and managed 20 years from now, or between now and 20 years, to enable transition at that time? It's a very abstract point, but to me, it's a more important abstract point now than it may have been in the past, because things are just different.
Yeah. And you know what? I find too, as a person, as a business owner, and as farmers, and again, as personality types, whether we're detail oriented or not, it can be very easy to be stuck in today and make decisions here. And then all of a sudden, 5 years later, if you're only thinking about today and you're not thinking much about the future, if you're just today, and then all of a sudden you get 5 years ahead and you go, oh, had we been thinking about that, we would have bought that piece of land, because, that would have been key. Or, you know what I mean? It's more, exactly, it's long-term strategic planning. The decisions we're making today, how are they leading into tomorrow? And you might want to touch on that a little bit more, but I kind of want to stop the conversation. You mentioned it once or twice already, but I really want to clarify your approach on transition planning. It's two parts. Do you want to go there, and then we can kind of loop back to more the management?
Yeah, I think that's a great approach.
Okay.
And so when I was thinking about what we're going to talk about today, it caused me again to think back, just practice what I preach, so to speak. But we used to talk. Well, first off, it was referred to as succession planning forever, and now more lately, it's been, I think, more appropriately referred to as transition planning. And there is a succession aspect of it, but we're talking about farm families where there's continuity within the farm, not where a farm is going to, where there is no next generation. That's very distinct difference between those two scenarios. And I think we're talking about the continuity aspect of it. But when we used to talk about it, Tracy, as succession planning, we understood it as the transition of ownership, management, and labor. And over time, when I say we, it's the people who work in advisory capacities in general with farm families. It's yourself, and I would classify, or I would put you into that classification of advisory. You're providing information and advice to farms. So the collective we in that, I think we've come to understand that certainly labor is an important part of it, and especially where the labor can draw in some of the discussions around entitlement and sweat equity and how the family members are compensated for the labor that they contribute. But that's not what we're talking about here today. That is an important discussion and a bit of a side. No, I can't say that. I was going to say a bit of a sidebar, but it is a different thread of a discussion than what we're talking about today. It's definitely not, I didn't want to minimize it by calling it a sidebar. But so the two most important things that we're talking about here is the transition of ownership and management. Labor over time sorts itself out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, you really see it. Sorry, I'm jumping in there, Terry. I want to simplify it for people because I know myself as a farmer and everybody I know, this concept, if we just talk about it so high level, can just be a bit much. So really, when you're saying transition planning, it's dealing with the ownership of the assets. And that's where all those tactics come in, like wills and shareholder agreements. It's legally taking the assets from one generation and making them legally owned by the next. That's part one. And then part two is more the management and all of that, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. One of the things that can complicate the ownership discussion is where some of the transition of ownership is going to farming children and non-farming children, as you know. So there can be that complicating factor there. If the ownership was all going to go to farming children, then it takes that away all that discussion about how does the retiring generation, mom and dad, allocate some of their estate to any kind of final distribution to their non-farming children. Okay, but that's everybody knows that. Mm-hmm. The management piece is distinct. With the next generation, obviously, that's going to carry on and manage the business. So they are very, very distinct. And as I said earlier, what's changed is the management aspect of transition planning for a lot of the reasons we discussed. The larger farms, more complex farms. I want to make a comment though here, because while we can talk at a fairly high level here conceptually about there being these two aspects of what we're talking about in transition, farm families that are involved in it, I observe, tend to blur the two discussions. Okay. They tend to blur the ownership discussion and the management discussion because some of that ownership is going to transition to the next generation who are picking up the management. Mm-hmm. So logically, you can, I think, understand, or anybody can understand, that there would be some of that blurring. Where the farm family can differentiate between the two, that I think helps the process. Well, it helps two things. It helps the process to proceed more smoothly, and I think it helps the family to better understand what it is we're talking about. But we spend we spend a considerable amount of time, I think, in the work that we do with farm families in trying to remind them or frame the discussion of this is a management item we're talking, or a management aspect of transition we're talking about, and this is the ownership, and this is how they may interact, to try to keep that differentiation apart. And if you think about it a minute, it just makes sense, because heck, we've got farm families that have basically grown up within the farm family, and they've owned the business, they've seen the family own it, and the business has been managed and run for a number of years and will continue to do so. Logically, those things tend to be blurred, right? Mm-hmm. And when we're talking about transition, we have to separate them when we can.
Well, and I guess in farming, and the fact that it's family, it does get blurred. Take a traditional business, for example, a CEO of a company, the managers, the VPs, that is the management decision. The group of owners and all of that is a totally different. That is just black and white, right? We are hiring these people to run the company in a traditional business, right? They're probably not related to the owners. Here is management. this is what each individual needs to do. And this is how each of these people are going to help to grow the business. And then at the back, probably hidden, is the ownership. Who owns that business? And that is very, very black and white. But I could see how in transition planning, that conversation just really weaves itself together, because the management of the farm are going to be the ownership. And a lot of those discussions would just blend, right? Where you're saying, I would venture, I'm not putting words in your mouth, Terry, but I would venture to say, hey, let's pretend we're not family here. Let's pretend you're not inheriting or buying this business. Let's talk about management. Like you were an employee that's hired. Let's talk about management. What's the vision? And then you put on the ownership hat and go, okay, you just so happen to be that person that's going to be buying the business. Now let's have a meeting about ownership and how we're going to make that happen. Is that right? To me, it's a lot easier to break those two up if we were talking about a non-farm family business, a traditional workplace that's just black and white.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree. And I think there's another aspect here that is pretty unique and special to farm families. It has to do with, I gave up a long time ago, Tracy, trying to talk to friends of mine in the city here that really had no connection to farming, then get them to understand that farming was, as a business, was different than a typical rural or urban business, just as you've explained. And it has to do with growing something, to raising an animal, to planting a crop and watching that grow. If there is something to it that is unique and special. Mm-hmm. And until someone's done it, I don't think they can understand that. So everything you say is true. And then we add that other dynamic to the discussion, and it just makes things a little bit more tricky sometimes.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Sorry, I jumped in there, but I just realized I'm in the farm world and I'm also outside the farm world. And that's a very straightforward discussion in non-agriculture family businesses.
Yep.
That's management, ownership. But in the farm, it's management, ownership, quickly and very entwined, right?
Yep.
Okay, so take it away. Go where you want to go with that. I jumped in there.
Well, you commented, and I picked up on it. You commented about a vision for management. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that's generally accepted that can be helpful for farm families when they're trying to understand transition within their business is to define what it is they're working towards. So a vision, goals for the future. I've seen it written as defining the common interest. Basically, what the exercise is intended upon doing is helping the farm family to talk about and get onto the same page as to what's the purpose around here. What are we working towards?
Okay.
That discussion applies, and I believe is relevant to farm families at any point along their business life cycle, whether they're in transition or not. And just logically, to me, if we've got clarity within the farm family as to what it is we're working towards, that logically is a stronger foundation from which to work than where we don't have that common common understanding. So this is important because I could say the majority of farm families won't have something written down that does speak to or reflect what it is that they're working towards. They'll all have a vision. They'll all have an idea of what they'd like to see in the future. But most farm families won't spend time actively understanding it, actively talking about it, trying to understand what it is other people want to accomplish and how we're going to get there. It's back to my comment earlier. Farms generally are enormously successful. So they've done a lot of things right over the years. So this is a little bit textbook, but there is benefit in being able to write down and come to consensus within the farm family. What is it that we're working towards? Mm-hmm. This is particularly applicable to transition, because if in the next 5 years, that future that they're working towards contemplates transitioning ownership and management to the next generation, how are we going to do it? And if we don't have everybody if we have people with different ideas, then doesn't mean it's going to fail, but it means that we've got some things to figure out. And sometimes that leads to some of the conflict. I think you had Jerry Friesen on a session here recently, and I would imagine he talked about big conflict and how it can arise. Yes. But here's where I want to tie into your comment about a vision for management. Just like as I understand, well, let me start it this way. I think there are 3 really important things, and you and I may have talked about this on different sessions, but there are 3 really important things that any farm family should try to understand and work to keep in alignment. That's the vision or the future. What is it that we're working towards? Our financial strengths and weaknesses, and lastly, the management. So those 3 things. Well, farm families define what it is that they're trying to accomplish, and then they should work to align their financial performance with it. In other words, Tracy, if you and I are going to go into business together and we set out and define this big vision of what we thought we could accomplish, and then our financial capabilities weren't anywhere close to enabling us to accomplish that, you and I are going to have some difficulty. Mm-hmm. Oh, we either have to address the financial performance and bring it into alignment with the future of the business, or vice versa, or some combination of the two. Now, so we should have a vision for the business. We should have a vision for the financial future of the farm, and then the vision for management that we talked about. What are we managing towards? And where we can tie this all back to a couple of the very first comments we made about what we're transitioning to things, ownership and management. We're going to try to understand how to transition management. My observations are that it is helpful to create a vision for that management. What are we managing towards?
Yes. Can I jump in there? The light bulb just went off for me. And I'm going to get really real and raw here. And I know we're going to talk about the human nature a little bit later. I wanted to talk to you about that. But here's what I have seen in transition planning, or lack thereof. And I'm going to be very stereotypical. I'm going to call it dad and son. So I have seen it, transition planning, not happen because the correct conversations didn't happen. But I personally believe there's a big power struggle, a control, and the positive end is pride of ownership. So let's say dad is farming and son is coming in. Where I have seen many transition planning conversations not happen, and where I feel the threat is, dad doesn't want to talk about it because he doesn't want to be kicked off his farm. He doesn't want to be dethroned. He's worked all his life and he's in the golden years of his farming operation. He's scared, concerned that he's no longer going to be part of this operation. Now, I might be going totally left field, Terry, but I'm grabbing what you're saying and applying it to a few situations I've seen in life. If a family was to sit down and have an open conversation and say, hey, dad, hey, mom, we want to take over this farm. What is your, and again, sorry, Terry, if I'm going somewhere way off, but I think I might build it around to where you're going. Mom, Dad, we want to be part of this farm. How long do you want to be managing the farm operation? At what point do you think you want to retire? Let's build a vision for how long you are the manager, and then at what point that's going to switch over to me as the upcoming generation. And this is, again, where I'm taking it. I feel if farm families had that conversation and opened it up that way, where it's a vision for management and a vision for management transition, I have a feeling a lot more transition conversations would happen. Relying on human nature and watching some of the farmers I know, they are diehard. They're independent. They've built this farm. That's all they know. That's all they want to do. They stop the conversation because they don't know what the future looks like. Because there is no discussion about who's boss, how we're going to work together, how that's going to be transition. And to me, if I'm piecing what you're saying together correctly, once you figure out the smooth transition of management, to me, the transition of ownership goes right hand in hand with that. If you can actually have that discussion and say, hey, Dad, you know what? I'm going to come back to the farm. And for the next 10 years, I'm going to work with you, knowing that we're working towards ownership here. After 10 years, maybe I'm going to become the farm manager and you are my right-hand man. And maybe at that point, we've set ourselves up financially, and that's when ownership begins to transfer. Am I getting that, Terry, or did I just go way, way off in left field?
No, I think you what you just said resonates with me, and it lines up nicely with what I was thinking about with that transition, and especially at the end there where you talked about bringing back to financial discussion, because we can figure out what we're going to manage, but if there's some financial challenges, then that's going to make it a little bit more difficult. Tracy, I think that when you're talking about getting clarity around what the son is maybe going to do in that situation, what he wants to manage, and typically it's the father who is reluctant to give up some of that management. That's just part of the people side of what we're talking about. It does help to have it. Well, it should be written down, but Tracy, it doesn't need to be 10 pages. It could be a half a page, just bullet points about what it is people are thinking about in terms of the transition of management. I think there's 3 steps. And then maybe I'll just back up a little bit here, because all farms get managed. The cows get milked, cows get fed, the crop gets planted, the crop gets harvested. It all gets done. Could it get done better? Well, sure. We could always do things differently or better. It becomes particularly exposed in how things are getting done when we're talking about transition, because there's change. Until that next generation comes along, how Dad did it and how Dad does it doesn't have the same importance, I guess, if you will, until we got another opinion, i.e. the next generation who thinks, well, I'd like to do it this way, or when can I get to do that? So you summed it up really, really nicely. And I think there's 2 or 3 things that a farm family can do to help this discussion along.
Okay.
And I think it has to do with creating that vision for management. So through transition planning, process helps. We'll do this, and then we'll do that. So process helps in a couple of ways. It helps, as you know, because it will be written down, and then people can understand and anticipate what's going to happen. So the process is important. If we don't, if a farm family doesn't follow process, It doesn't mean that the transition within the family is going to fail. No, does not mean that. What it does tend to lead to, though, is progress like this. Spin, 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 and we're just slowly moving ahead, which causes some people a lot of frustration because they observe that nothing's going on around here. There's no change. It gets talked about, but it's all lip service. So what I'm suggesting is when we're trying to, if anybody listening to this likes this notion of creating a vision for management, I think there's 2 or 3 things that they can do to help that along. And one of them is to apply process to that. Okay. So the first thing that I think they can benefit from doing is gaining clarity on what's getting managed on the farm right now. Mm-hmm. And remember, it's all getting managed, but I don't run across many farm families that have a fairly detailed list, if you will, of what different things are getting managed on the farm. Now that just makes sense, right? Because the management has evolved over time. What I'm suggesting is they take a point in time, April 2021, and capture what's getting managed on the farm. That becomes the what. The next thing then is the how. So how do we want that management to look? And the third thing is the time. When? 3 years from now? 5 years from now? So if the farm family struggles with getting clarity around what all the things that are actually being managed on the farm, some of them more important or critically important or more important than others. But there's a minutia of things that get managed on the farm. Not done. They get done. There's a difference between managing something and doing it. So I'm talking about who's responsible for those tasks. So first is what is getting managed on the farm now. And then once we get clarity on that, then we can talk in real terms about what we're going to transition. Mm-hmm. So that becomes the how. And then the when. And then typically the discussion then is, well, the son, as you illustrated there, he doesn't take it all on. You take on a bit at a time. Or maybe there needs to be some experience or training, or how are we going to do this? And then over what timeline? So those 3 things will help to create this vision for management.
I like it. I've done similar activities in corporate world. Actually, I hired a coach for my business, and they did that exact same thing. And they go, okay, here's all the main activities in your business. Who does them? And we applied my name where applicable and other people on my team. And it was making sure everybody knows what's happening. Everybody's accountable. And then in this case, I like it. Well, in 5 years, what does this look like? It might look like dad does all of this except for chores right now. But in 5 years, son or daughter, whoever it is, they want to have been taking over this, the books, whatever the case is, right?
Yep. Yeah.
Go ahead.
We have an exercise that we help farm families deal with this. And I regularly get comments when the farm family members see the list about, whoa, they'll see a whole bunch of names and a whole bunch of places, and there'll be gaps. And it's when it's in a list, then we can talk to the list versus talk back and forth about what it is we think. Because what's on paper and what they've agreed to is what we're managing. That becomes something that we can try to understand then from a transition perspective.
Okay.
Yeah.
I like it.
If I could, I'm mindful of the time here a little bit, but I'll just very quickly, Tracy, there's an extension of that activity for anybody listening to this that wants to even take it one step further. There's a concept around management that we refer to, I don't know if there's a textbook on it, but we refer to it as desired end date. Mm. So if this concept of a vision for management resonates with anybody listening, One of the things that they can do is to take, and I would suggest, the four main areas of management: finance, marketing, operations, and human resources, and define what the farm family would like those management functions to look like on their farm 5 years from now or at point of transition. Those become the desired end state of finance, the desired end state of marketing or HR. And it becomes on a page of paper or 2 pages of paper in written form what it is that the farm family is managing towards.
Neat. I want to say something a little risque here. Knowing what I know about business and planning and life and human nature, knowing what I know now, if I was to come into a farm family business with the intention of buying that business, I would come in a little more strategic than I think. And again, there might be other people that come in very strategic and very clear. But from what I have observed is the second generation tends to come in and they start working. And that's where that whole concept of sweat equity and resentment and lack of conversation comes in. If I, and again, this might explode, might not work, might be shut down, might be bad, but I would almost venture that the next time I would do this in life, in the next go around, I would come in and let's say it was my dad. Hey, Dad, I'm coming back to the farm. And one day I would love to own the entire farm. I don't want to push you out and I want you to enjoy your time here. Why don't we sit down in advance so that we're both clear of what we're working towards? And again, there's no pressure. We'll talk about this over the next year, 2, 5, 10. But let's maybe start this conversation about what the transition looks like, what you want to do. When would you feel comfortable handing the reins over and the ownership versus, and again, in your youth, you just come back eager. There might not be communication. There's lack of clarity. Then we have farm family fights. Would you, sorry, and if I open 5 cans of worms there, to me, I think this vision for management is a great way to non-aggressively start that transition of ownership, isn't it?
Absolutely. It can work. And the benefit of doing this is that we get something on paper and then we speak to something versus speak to a person. We're speaking to that. That's what we all agreed on, how the farm's being managed. And what do we want to change about it? We speak to what we've agreed to that's written down on paper.
Yeah.
That's we're all people, right? You talked about the human condition earlier. We're all people. So we have feelings and we have opinion, and that's a strength. I think we should, through transition, if we can, try to celebrate that human condition, because all the assets in the world and the best tax structures in the world aren't going to enable success going forward. I mean, wait a minute, aren't going to ensure success going forward. They'll enable success going forward. What's going to ensure success going forward are the people.
Yes.
And we are human.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, and sorry, go ahead, Terry.
Well, I was just a vision came to mind here. I don't know if you watch curling, but I love watching curling, and and recently at least in the Canadian curling championships, Scott Paper Towels was one of the sponsors, right? And they have that commercial where everybody's human, and so there's people running to the washroom and blowing their nose and crying, and it's about the fact that, hey, we're all people. And of course, from the Scott Paper products, either tissue paper or toilet paper, then yeah, they're promoting that, well, people need Scott paper products. But we are all people.
Yes.
We all have emotions. We're human.
I didn't see that. And Terry, being a farmer myself and seeing other farm families and knowing and seeing transition planning not happening and going bad, I just kind of like you, I think, and I go, how do we do this better? In every single part, it's not the tax structure that messes a farm family up. It's the people. And to me, when you're talking about a vision for management, and again, stop me in my tracks if I'm taking what you're doing and applying it somewhere else. But to me, that is the start with the end in mind. And I have noticed that a lot of farm families don't talk about that. And that's key, right? Because everybody wants clarity. The founders want clarity. It's their farm. They built it. They want to manage it. They want to enjoy their glory years. And from what I've seen, and kudos to the farm families that have the open conversations, but the ones I've seen is they don't. And every once in a while, there's a tiny little conversation that gives the next generation a glimmer of hope. And then it's radio silence. Where to me, and again, I'm picking your activity here, a vision for management, to open up that Pandora's box and go, hey, why don't we plan the vision of who's going to manage this for the next years instead of just coming in thinking it's all going to be ours, resenting that it's not, and then because we don't want to be dethroned as a founding generation, we just stop the conversation when really, to me, this, and I'm repeating myself a bit, but the light bulb in my mind is going off on how to use this. If we plan our vision for management, that just walks us through the ownership.
Yep. Well, certainly. And Tracy, there's another aspect of that I think is important to get out on the table here. And one, what we're talking about, either a vision for the business, and in this case now a vision for management, a properly constituted vision, from what I've come to learn and understand, is that's not set in stone. The vision can and should evolve over time. Things change. So this vision for management that we're talking about isn't set in stone. And it doesn't mean that the vision that we thought was going to occur over 3 years now may need to be accelerated a year, or maybe it needs to get postponed a year, or maybe there's an opportunity come along and we're going to change it up a little bit. But that discussion is enabled or assisted or benefited from having something written down as here's what's going on right now and here's what our plans are. Because back to this context of looking back, that's what we understood. Now we're 2 years down the road and, oh yeah, that's a little different than we thought 2 years ago. But at least we have that basis to work from. It works.
Yeah, that is very powerful. And again, I'm relying on my experience in life, as we always do, right? And what I have seen gone bad, what I observe, and what I think we can do better. And to me, I think in this conversation that you just presented, you almost hold the key right there. Start with the end in mind. And again, I think it's a friendly, open way to start the transition conversation, right? Because I've always said, one last thing, Terry, I've always said I'm in the middle. I'm on the fence. I have a leg on both sides. I'm old enough to respect the founding generation and the fact that I'm getting older and older. And you know what? With each year you pay stuff down or you grow, you get better at farming and you go, oh my gosh, in 20 years, I'm supposed to be done?
Yeah.
This is getting exciting. So I'll name it. I don't care. People can think what they want about me. And I don't think it's just me, but I'm old enough to respect where the founders are at and going, man, I've built this. It's getting good. I don't want to be kicked off my farm because we haven't had a proper conversation on how to work together. But then my other leg on the other side of the fence is I'm young enough to be eager and ambitious and hungry, and I don't want to spend the key years of my life not knowing what my future is. I couldn't handle that, right? I think a person has the right to have clarity. And from seeing different stuff that has happened, the assumptions and expectations are what kills farm families. And to me, your activity here about the vision for management and the start with the end in mind, that right there, if approached nicely, is the greatest way to have an amazing transition where everybody wins. Having
clarity around that, Tracy, I've watched this happen. That it provides a comfort for the dad, like the retiring generation and the next generation, to get that. Well, let's just farm together and enjoy this, because this is, and we're not at loggerheads about what might happen. And no, like let's just understand what is happening, define what it is we'd like to happen, and then accept that over the next period of time, there's going to be some changes back to the, hey, we're people and we can deal with this. It can work. It definitely helps. I guarantee. That's a pretty strong word, but I guarantee it helps. But it will.
Money back guarantee.
Yeah.
I have show notes, disclaimers. Terry or Tracy will not be held responsible if your transition plan does not work.
Oh, yeah, it's not.
Again, the human element. And that's exactly what you said, because we throw that in there and wow. I don't know if sorry, Terry, I just got excited and jumped in there and kind of flashed back and go, if I had these thoughts and words, and again, we own our own farm from Anthony's parents, but I look at so many people, and instead of coming in the way that we do as youth and not having the right words as founders, this is the bridge that, in my mind, that kind of makes that all happen. It would be great if people listening can have these tools and go, hey, we both agree that we both want to be on this farming operation. We all want to be happy, right? Yeah. We all want to play out how we want our life to play out. Now, how does that meet here with this vision?
How do you mean, Tracy?
Well, and again, to me, it would be more, instead of just expectations and assumptions and then fear and not having the conversation. Let's put it this way. If I was 25 or 30, I've worked a few years after university, we're ready to come back to the farm. I'm coming back to the farm. I would love to have known this as a tool to approach a parent and go, hey, to me, this is a tool. We both want to be here. You're happy I'm back. I'm good to work on this farm, but my end goal is to manage this and buy this farm. At one point, you're going to want to retire. What does that look like? Why don't we talk about that so that we're all on the same page, instead of all running around the farm, living in our old world, hoping, wanting, assuming, resenting.
Yep. Yeah, I from a challenges associated with transition planning perspective, I think a lot of the problems are around management. Mm-hmm. And so what we're talking about is they're going to be in place. Well, rather than in the process that I think that most farm families use or talk about is, well, when do I get to make the decisions around here?
Yes.
On any different aspect. That's what, back to the human condition. If you're a parent and you can't get your son or your daughter to take on any responsibility or have any drive to, I want to manage this, well, that's a challenge too in transition, right? And so we should celebrate that that readiness or that urge to, hey, I want to do this. I think I can do this. Well, at that point, when they're younger, they're knowing. I think it's, I know I can do this. What we don't know, we don't know. But yeah. But my point is, like, let's agree on what is getting managed, because that's black and white. It is right. And this, Tracy, this is not just for large farms. Like this process can apply to any farm at any size. Obviously, there's more things going on a bigger farm, but we're talking about the relativity and transition. Whatever the size of the farm is, whatever it is they're doing, they're transitioning, whether they're 1,500 acres or 15,000.
Yeah.
This activity will benefit the understanding of what we're talking about when we're discussing the ultimate transition of management.
I love it. And again, Terry, I'm thinking if I was that younger generation coming back to the farm, again, I know everything, right? The beauty of youth, you just are so optimistic and full of knowledge and eagerness. But if you were a founder, this is just such a powerful tool to make sure that your transition and your legacy goes exactly how you want it. Let's say I'm the dad or mom right now, and my kid's coming back. Okay, little Bobby, Susie, you can come back to the farm. I am eager to have you back. We know you want to take over the farm one day.
Yeah.
So here's what goes on in the farming operation. The big one is crop rotation, let's say. But little Bobby and Susie want to try all kinds of crazy new crops because they're young and eager. So to me, Terry, could you use this application, and you're going to come back to the farm, and for the next 5 years, I'm going to teach you the ropes. I know you've been watching me, helping me, working on the farm, doing the crops for many years. But for the next 5 years, we're going to work together. And I'm going to plant what my studies have done is the right crops to plant. And then in 5 years, you'll have seen how it goes. You'll see the results. Why don't we sit down in 5 years and then we talk about transitioning some of the crop management decisions to you? I don't know.
Yeah. Yep. Well, outside of that process, it's just, I want to do it now.
Right. And I'm just thinking, because again, I feel I have a powerful spot in, I know both sides, the founders and the youth. And if you can come in with a nice plan and harness that energy with clear communication through this vision for management, you take away all resentment, right? Because if the kid comes back to the farm and they want to do it all, and nobody's talking about why they can't or the plan on when they might be able to have input, there's anger and resentment, and and then you add in the family layers. Dad doesn't trust me. He thinks I know nothing, right? I would imagine you're going to get that.
Well, certainly. So here, not to get too specific, but let's just take this application of what you talked about to one fairly narrow piece of it. Let's go to finance, financial management. All right. So the retiring generation has done this for years, continues to want to do it, and wants to retain control over this for some time. And we have now on this activity list, whatever's getting managed financially in that farm family, in that farm business, gets recorded. And then we have a discussion. So the next generation looks at that. And I in absence of that list, Tracy, logically, and then also by observation, I don't think the next generation fully comprehends what all is and does fall under the area of managing finances in the business.
Yeah.
We get it all mapped out. And then the discussion is then not about, well, I can just do this. The discussion is, okay, what skill set does the next generation need to enable us to successfully transition this aspect of management? Yeah. So again, it's written down, and then we can talk to the different activities and what has to happen. Similarly in operations, similarly in marketing, and similarly in HR.
Amen.
Yeah. It promotes You know, one of the best things we can do in transition planning is actively or promote active communication. And when I think of active, I mean something that's not just talked about, but it's something that's actually in front of us that we're speaking to, and that we can probably record some kind of a comment to it. So active, structured communication. This enables that, and that just helps the whole process.
I love it. This conversation got me really excited, Terry. I think you're right. Your growing concern about this whole topic not being talked about enough.
Tracy, let's go back to what my overarching concern was, that how are we going to think about this where farms are 20 years down the road and that much more complex than they are now. This is my point. We got to figure out this management piece here now, and so over the next 20 years, make sure that our management evolves at a pace that will enable transition at the next generation.
Mm.
And yeah,
powerful.
It is a bit powerful, I guess, in its concept, but it is just good business.
It is. Everything here that we discussed, when I had a coach and consultant come in, these were all the activities you did. And if you think of this in the business world, they have to do this. They have to groom people and bring them on and be clear, because there's so many people in an organization. They're not tied in, and they don't care so much like blood does about the farming operation. So you got to really be structured in the corporate world and have activities. And the big companies, the really strong companies, will take somebody from their entry level position, really speak to them, coach them, find out what they're interested in, and help groom them to get them to where they need to be. So to me, what you're doing is just taking that and putting that to the farming context, which is even more powerful, because I feel these activities could just help clarify everything, and that will take a lot of the expectation and assumptions and resentments out. And at the end of the day, that's more important in family business, equally important. But when it's your family at stake, you should have processes like this to make sure that things don't go bad, because it's not just a position at the end of the day. That's your son, daughter, dad, mom, cousin, that if it doesn't work out because it wasn't deliberately planned, well, heck, that's a relationship, not just a job, right?
I agree. Yep.
Sorry, that's my soapbox.
There you go.
Got me really fired up, Terry.
Yeah. I'm up there on that soapbox, right with you, Tracy.
Just push me off whenever you need to.
Yeah.
You get me so fired up. I love these ideas. It's so important. And I think you're right to, hey, let's stop focusing on the ownership transfer and the wills and all of that, because, right, I mean, that's going to come, but those are technical details. Right.
Yep. Those they are technical. Yes, they are technical. The likelihood of a successful transition where the focus is all on structure, all on the ownership piece, is less than where we have a really good understanding of how we're going to transition manage. Better managed farms make more money. Better managed farms through transition make more money, more margin, more cash flow, better enables transition. It's kind of like as simple as that.
And happier people, which make all the rest of that go round and better.
Yep. It's still there always has been, there always will be problem situations that everything that we're talking about won't bring resolution to what the farm family may be dealing with. But this will, I think, applying a process like this would help to create better outcomes for more farm families, I think.
I love it.
I'm trying to say that it's not a panacea. It's not going to solve everyone's problems, but it will help a lot of farm families.
No, totally. And I agree. And I have found with you and a lot of the other guests that I speak to, there's a common theme. It's the people. And there's more and more discussion about the people and the soft skills that go into transition planning.
Yeah.
I think you really knocked it out of the park with this idea.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting work, as you know. Nothing better than getting to work with a farm family. It's just the best thing ever. And this is a challenge. I'll put it that. I won't say difficult. This is a challenge for a lot of farm families, and it's a good challenge because the outcome is worth working for.
Perfect. Well, unless you want to add to all that amazing wisdom you have already shared, that being said, do you have any final words of encouragement or wisdom for our audience on this subject?
I have one.
Good.
I pre-thought this, and I'm interested. I'm going to pose a rhetorical question to anybody that's listening. How much is any farm family prepared to invest in the successful transition of the farm, say in today or in the next 5 years, and then in its future transition? So the part B to that question is the investment in terms of three things. How much time are they prepared to spend or commit to it? How much energy, which for some farm families that might be a fairly significant consideration. And then lastly, how much money are they prepared to spend, or invest is a better word, invest in their future. And I don't have a proxy for the investment in the energy they're willing to commit or the time that they're willing to commit. But I do have a proxy for the financial investment. And this just came to me as I was thinking about this in the last 2 or 3 days. There's a lot of discussion right now, at least that we're having, and I think it's pretty general in the industry, as to what should I do to lock in or benefit from these current low interest rates. I think there's some legitimate concern around what might happen to interest rates post-COVID. So then my head went to the proxy for the financial investment in transition to interest rates. And what I thought about was, if you had a farm with $5 million worth of debt, I spend time talking to those farms about what the impact of a 50 or 25 basis point increase in that would be. So farms think that a 25 basis point increase in interest as a significant factor and something that they should think seriously about. 25 basis points on $5 million, I think works out to about $12,500. Or would a farm family then think that an investment in any kind of resource development, whether it's skill set development, whether it's talking to advisors or whatever would fall into that investment, just put a frame around correlation to the risk associated with, in this case, not making the investment, but in my case with the interest rate, the risk associated with an increase in interest of 25 or 50 basis points.
Yeah.
That was my closing thought.
I agree. And you know what? There is so much power in speaking to and working with professionals, because a lot of this stuff is not easy. And hey, if you want your farm to continue on, how much is that worth to you? Instead of the different outcomes that can happen. So I appreciate and respect and love the work that you guys do, that you do, Terry. Thank you for coming on the show. If people want to connect with you, how can they connect with you and Backswath Management?
Well, our website is easy, Tracy. We're pretty proud. We've got a new website now. It's getting lots of really good comments, and there's a really easy to use connect function through the website. So that's one way. Our office numbers are on there. There's 12 of us that work with farm families. So hey, there's lots of resources here. It'd be as simple as phoning the office, contacting me directly. It's just my terry.betker@backswath.com. Heck, that works. Phone calls work, or just through the website, backswath.com, and on the page there, it's contact the office. We will respond. And some of the resources that I've discussed here around that management activity, some of that stuff, Tracy, we'll share.
Okay.
We'll absolutely make it available. Doesn't have to come attached to any big consulting engagement. We share resources all the time. I just think it helps farm families, and that's top of our list of values, helping farm families.
You guys are awesome that way. And so are you, Terry. Thank you so much for joining us. We are going to wrap up this awesome episode. If you liked it, make sure to like it, share it, subscribe, and get the word out there so other farmers can hear words and wisdom like Terry and what he just shared. So thank you for joining us, and we'll see you on next week's episode. Bye, guys.
Bye, everybody.
You've been listening to Impact Farming. For more great episodes and articles designed to help you manage and grow your farming operation, head on over to farmmarketer.com. Don't forget to sign up while you're there. We will see you on the next episode.